Today, I'm talking with Alistair Cockburn. We talk about the creation of the Agile Manifesto and all its effects, how he knows so much about different kind of cultures, why people hire Alistair for technology and keep him around for the human aspects, and why Alistair has to stay fresh in everything he does. I'm Yves Hanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello, everyone, and with me today I have Alistair Cockburn. Good evening. Well, for me it's evening. For me it's just a little bit after 11 o'clock in the evening. What's it on? What time is it on your side?
It's 5 o'clock. End of
5
work,
o'clock.
start of play. So this counts as play for me.
This counts as play. Okay, that's kind of nice. Yes, I'm in Belgium, and let's show this a little bit now that we already know a little bit about time zones. I'm in Belgium here, and if I'm correct, you're somewhere in Florida. Did I remember this
Look
correctly?
at Tampa. If you go over to Tampa on the Gulf Coast,
Is that somewhere there that you are?
maybe Orlando or something. So a bit right on the Gulf Coast. See if you can find. Just scooch it over to the Gulf Coast. See where it says Tampa? Can you see where it says Tampa to your left?
To my left, I should see it a little more.
No, you put the marker. You see the marker?
Ah, yeah, the marker there. So exactly.
Left of the marker says Tampa.
So that's close enough, I would say.
Yeah, good enough. I'm on the Gulf Coast. It's 10 minutes to the beach from here.
Wow, and I know that you love diving and anything, things like that. So that's definitely good for you to be near the coast, I would say.
I like to go into the water. It's generally warm water with a glass of wine, and I watch the sunset in the Gulf Coast.
That's well, and that's where we already introduced you a little bit. But for the people who don't know you, the few people that are existing in the world, in the agile world, that don't know you, just say in a few words, what do you want people to know about you?
What I really professionally or personally? Those are big questions.
That's up to you. What you want people to know about you.
One of your questions is going to be, what is it people don't know so much about me? So I might say something for that. But so professionally, I got started in this methodology business in 1991. IBM hired me to write object-oriented methodology or methodology for Smalltalk and C++ projects in 91. I didn't know anything about methodologies, and my boss gave me the infamous advice to go and debrief projects. Since it was IBM, I got tickets all around the world, and I went and interviewed project teams and said what works, what doesn't work. And whatever they said, I wrote it down. 10 years later, 12 years later, I got a PhD out of that at the University of Oslo. And so everything I know basically comes from people saying, we did this and we liked it, or we didn't like this, and here's what happened. And then I put together theories. And that was all in the 90s. And then in 2001, I was one of the people who helped to write the Agile Manifesto. And since then, we've been kind of cleaning up the mess.
It's a nice way to put it. Yes, let's put it like that. Okay, and indeed, let's jump into that first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but is something that influenced you in who you are?
Oh yes, I actually have an answer for this one. My parents moved around when I was little. I've moved around all my life. So parents are English, born in the U.S. At the age of 1, my father got posted to Sri Lanka for 2 years. Then back to the US for a year, then Bangladesh for 2 years. And then at about the age of 6 or 7, I came back to the US, really not fit for American school life at all. And when I graduated, I went to Sweden as an exchange student, and I came back and went to college, and then I didn't much like that. So when I was a junior in college, I went to Scotland and came back and got a job in the US and didn't much like that. So then I got a job with IBM in Switzerland for 7 years and came back. And then I went to Norway for a year. So the reason that influenced me is that I've lived in so many cultures that there is no such thing as a best culture, or even for me, not even a home culture, not even the US culture. I'm probably about 1/3 US and 1/3 European and 1/3, I don't know, some big mess. But the reason that influences me is because when we talk about methodologies, I can't say something is best, right? When I go to a company, I always say to them, well, your company's still alive, your company's still in business, so you're doing something right. It's not for me to screw that up. So there's this cultural relativism that you'll find goes through all of my work, that I'm pretty sure you can back up to all of the travels that I did as a child, teenager, adolescent, young adult. So yeah.
So because you know so many different cultures, so you both respect that, and at the same time you look at, okay, what's different and how.
Yeah, there's no correct culture, right? If you look at all there's no correct culture. They're just all cultures, and they all work in some way the way they work. Same when you go to a company. So if you, as you would know, from my crystal methodology family, it's not a methodology, it's a family of methodologies that have got some common elements like close collaboration, communication, feedback, improvement, stuff like that. There are no baseline cultural rules other than you need to collaborate and stop and reflect periodically. So that cultural relativism, the openness and tolerance, operating within somebody else's native culture is part of me from childhood.
Yeah, and I do remember when we first talked, when we talked for the original version of this series in the book, that when I asked you where are you located, because at that time we had also a kind of map in it, that you said at that time, oh, you can just put me on an airplane over the ocean because I don't have a home at this moment. I'm living a little bit everywhere, and I was like, okay, and your story fits in right into that, because
Well,
you basically live.
Yeah, for 6 years I was a nomad. I mean, I had no home address. I had a PO box, and I made one tour of the globe each year. So roughly speaking, 7 months northern hemisphere, 5 months southern hemisphere. I could block out which months I would be where, and I did that for 6 years, and best years of my life. So when you say where are you, at that time I literally had no home address, so it was airplane anywhere.
Yeah, and I definitely, and I remember, or I seem to know that you learned a lot of languages. I know you speak Spanish pretty well, because with Augustine, what we just talked about, he talked about one of his favorite books, that he said you liked it as much, but it only exists in Spanish, and it was kind of difficult book to read. So if you already know some languages pretty well, I would say. And I think there's a lot from that history, I would say, learning the cultures and the languages and everything in between and around, I would say.
My German got good enough that I was able to run facilitated workshops in German in the
Wow.
late 90s, and now my French and Spanish are good enough that I teach, lecture, and consult in French and Spanish in France and
Well,
South.
I can speak French, but last time I tried German, I had 3 years of German in school, but last time I spoke German, they told me that they didn't understand Dutch, so that was about the last time I tried it. So that was, I'm sorry for all my German friends, but yeah, that's the problem for me, is that German and Dutch, they seem very similar, but there are actually a lot of difference, and that it's hard if you want to learn a language that looks too similar. It's sometimes kind of.
Good. What's the next question?
Yes, let's move into the next one. So if you had not been doing what you've been doing now, what do you think would have become of you?
When I was in college, I was interested in psychology and sociology, but I was in an engineering school, computer engineering. And at that time, psychology was mostly measuring rats in mazes, and sociology was all statistics. And I really wanted to know how humans work. But possibly I could have become an anthropologist because I like anthropology. And in fact, what I do, so I started off as a hardware designer, and there's too much, like they lock you in a room and then you just drop on bits of paper for, a year or two. That's not very much for a person like me who likes to be with people. So I slowly kind of moved my career into more and more what looks like psychology, anthropology, sociology, which is in fact what you see in my career is. So my company's name is Humans and Technology. And it started in 1994. And what I used to say is they hire me for the technology aspect and keep me around for the human aspect.
You hire me that's kind of nice.
Yeah, so you hire me because I can do object-oriented design or use cases, requirement, project management. But what I really contribute in a sense is just like that social smoothing that gets it so people work well together. So even when I was on a long-term project and charging, more than I was worth as the project was winding down, they told me, we're not getting rid of you because you're our insurance policy. Like if anything comes up, we just want to have you around.
Yeah. And in a sense, that's a little bit how I got to know you, because just this is the first book that I read from you, so the Surviving Object-Oriented Projects, and indeed I read it because I was interested in the object orientation parts of it, but I gradually moved with you, I would say, to a lot more of the human aspects. So that's definitely.
Funny story on the book I wrote in 2001 called Agile Software Development, right? The first book on Agile that came out. And that's because I already had that exact one with the blue cover. Thank you. Yes. I basically had it mostly written at the time that we wrote the manifesto, and it was going to be called Software Development as a Cooperative Game was going to be the title of the book. And then I converted it and called it Agile Software Development. The acquisition editor didn't look at it till we went to press, and he wrote to me and he said, hey, and the first chapter is like, what is a human being? How does communication work? What's an individual? What's a team? Those are the first 3 chapters. And it gets up to page 90 or something. And he goes, hey, I just started reading your book finally, and I'm up to page 86, and you still haven't gotten to the meat yet. And I wrote him back and I said, I'm sorry, that is the meat. Like, as far as I'm concerned, you can throw away the second half of the book and keep the first 3 chapters, and that's the part I cared about. So it's all psychology, sociology, anthropology. So that's
but at that time, people thought about, okay, the software part is the meat part, where you were like, no, the other part is the meat part. Yeah, it's interesting. Let's move indeed to that third one. What do you consider your biggest challenge at this time, at least the challenge that you want to share?
Well, I saw this in one of your previous interviews, and I was probably thinking, what was your biggest challenge at some moment in time in your life, which I could answer. For the one right now, I don't know, but I will tell you because it's on my mind. Is it's happened like 3 times in my life, but when I had little kids, 2 or 3 children under the age of 6 at home, and also trying to be a professional, there's not enough minutes in the day. That's a challenge. So the first time it happened was when my second son was just born, and I had a fairly oppressive boss at IBM. And she literally sent me home with a computer. I was writing some early artificial intelligence algorithms. And I was supposed to be writing artificial intelligence algorithms while I was burping the baby at 2 a.m. That was her bright idea. I was going to be productive while I was burping the baby. And then when I started being a consultant, right, you're trying to get the business, and I remember saying, this job will never shrink down to a 40-hour week. It just can't. It's a 60-hour. And I just remember one time, and we had at this point 3 children under the age of 6, and my wife and I one evening just stepped outside of the house, and we just looked at the lights of the city or the stars or whatever we looked at. We breathed for a couple of minutes, didn't say anything, And we turned to each other, and I said, yeah, okay, here we go again. And back in the house, right? And yeah,
I
those
think
were,
every parent that has a few children can relate to that moment, I think.
well, it depends a little bit what your career is, but imagine now anybody, let's say just take IBM, because I was working there. If you're in your 30s, you're considered, that's your upwardly mobile career launch time period. If you don't make it by the time you're 40, right, it's kind of late to get started. You have a reputation. In your 30s is when you have little children. And that's
Exactly.
male or female, right? It doesn't matter, man or woman, father, mother. This is a brutal time of life. And I ran a schedule that would kill me today. And because I was in my 30s, I could do it. But this is pretty normal. And I would say that was just flat out challenge. And I guess why was it good is you build kind of an empathy for people in really harsh time-bound situations. When I meet people who've got any kind of a time-bound constraint, where they're just working too hard and they got stuff happening in their private life, really I can identify and empathize with that. I can't say it particularly helped me in any other particular way, but definitely that's the biggest challenge ever.
Well, already empathizing with people who are in that stage can definitely help, because, like you say, a lot of, well, the moment that you become parent, you think you're ready, but we're not ready for many parts of it, and this is one part of it that we can hardly breathe, or like you say, we have to take a breath a little bit and then take it. I think just today I read an article for women that says, well, you need to have your career going and set by your 30s, and I think it's mostly for exactly that same reason, because at that same time it's becoming almost impossible, and I think the burden on women might be even harder at that time, depending on how the relationship and how we're working together in the partnership, of course. But yeah, that's definitely something I recognize. And I would say, I don't want to go too much into detail because it would take us too long, but in COVID times, I think we've seen it even worse, I would think. I can imagine if you're now in your 30s, in your career, having a few children, and then being locked at home for 2 years, I can definitely imagine that that would be insane. I can already see how much burden it took just for me. I have older children, so we're in a different set of life, but still, it's been hard for many people, even if you haven't been sick and everything.
Yeah.
That's a combination that's definitely. And like you say, it brings empathy for the people who are in that part of their life.
Sure. There's
Definitely.
a recognition of that. Yeah. And so, yeah, that was not fun. I did survive it. I did get through it. I actually wrote, the first book and built some consulting and et cetera, et cetera. So I got through it, but yeah, I'd say empathy is the only other good thing that comes out, just understanding the paths that people's lives will go through.
And for yourself, do you recognize if you're in a similar kind of moment before you get there? Because I can see that that might help you as well, or is that something that you
No,
totally didn't encounter
I
anymore?
was thinking about it. I found, my challenge today is different, and it's kind of interesting. And I prefer not to get too much personal life, but I got divorced, and she got everything, E for everything. Like so, and I was saving up for retirement and everything. If you're self-employed, especially in the U.S., there is no decent pension
No.
that happens. It'll get a couple of $100 a month. So and the good thing is this is, especially I bought this house. I bought this house here during COVID time, and I bought it cash. So I used up all my cash and bought the house. I didn't have interest payments, but then I didn't have any money. So now I don't have any money. So people go, oh, so you're going to retire? No, me? No. So,
No, you can't.
no, you have to have money to retire. So now why is this good? It's interesting is because it means I have to stay fresh, right? I've got another 20 years, 30 years to go. I will never retire. I have to stay up on what's happening everywhere. I have to keep like active and on the edge, leaning downhill, right? Always focusing, go, gee, I'm amazed you're like, did all that stuff 20 years ago and you're still active. I go, I have to. I have to be relevant. I have to find out like what's happening today. How does it matter? So that's a challenge. It's easier for me than someone who's not known, but it's a challenge. And the reason it's good is it's if you think, hey, Alistair's still out there foraging and inventing and constructing, it's because not just because I'm rich and bored, it's because I can't afford not to, so I have to. So it keeps me really, really alive and active.
But I think the both of it combined is you still not just stay active, but at the same time you make sure that you live a balanced life in the sense that
the balance is, as you know, because I just came back from vacation. I knock off at 5. I don't work more than 40 hours a week. I have succeeded with that. I have enough cash flow. I can stay functioning, easier than other people who don't have a client list and a name, already. So my life is easier. But when I started becoming a consultant, I looked at other consultants, other people, and the goal was to become so rich, so fast that they could retire early. And I said, well, I've got 2 problems with that. The first is nobody succeeds with that. So you'll burn yourself out and you won't get rich. And I met exactly one person who did get rich, by the way, and we compared notes. And the second thing is if you retire early, what are you going to do when you get up in the morning? Like, good, chill for
looks boring at times.
2 years, and 2 years go by, and now what are you going to do when you get up in the morning? And so that guy who did succeed and did get rich, he took on volunteer board positions because he was bored, right? So I said, okay, my attitude, this is back when I first became a consultant. I said, I'm going to just keep my work so interesting I can keep doing it for the rest of my life. And ideally, I can dial it a little bit. What I've learned, you can't dial it down too much. Like if on a scale of 1 to 10, if I dial it down to 4, I lose all my clients. I can't get too quiet. Mm-hmm. But I can dial it between like 5 and 8. I don't have to take it up to 10. So I intend to keep doing this for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and yeah, that's a little bit like you said before, the 6-year traveling and everything. That's there's a lot of balance there in all of these things.
That's
important. So that's
what's your next question?
It kind of automatically brings me indeed to that next question, that what drives you? Because a lot of what you say there is a lot of passion, there is a lot of drive. There's partially the drive that you already said about, well, you need to keep the money. But I think there's a lot more drive than that. It's not just the money.
Well, here's an interesting thing, and my oldest son asks me about this from time to time, because somewhere around, I don't know, 2006, I was just bored stiff. And my son was old enough, he was a teenager. He may have been around 20 or something, I don't remember the age exactly. And he was asking me, like what motivates you, or what motivated you? And I said, I started in 1987, 88 with a question in IBM research, just looking at design teams. I just asked, what makes things go better? Just what makes things go better? I didn't have anything in mind. And I was working in a tools department. So the answer in that department had to be tools. The answer had to be tools. I did about 3 years of research, and I found that tools do not make things better. Tools very much don't get used, et cetera, et cetera. So I dropped that. And then my next assignment was methodology. So I said, well, do methodologies make things better? And the answer is a little bit, but not so much. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then by the time I got my PhD dissertation done in 2003, I really asked in that dissertation, so what is the answer? What makes things go better? What moves the needle? And what I found is the quality of community, the quality of collaboration, the quality of interaction is the thing that makes things go better. That plus the feedback and part of agile.
Individuals and interaction over processes and tools in a sense.
Well, and heart of agile, collaborate, deliver, reflect, improve. But
exactly.
But along the way, I'm kind of the scientist in our community. I'm a theoretical anthropologist or sociologist. Like, why does this work? And I've got all these graphs and charts. Trust diminishes as you reduce the frequency of personal interaction. It's a graph, right? Communication diminishes or increases depending, right? So you can steer. This is like the science of designing in teams. And I started on that in 1987, and around 2000, 3, 4, I got done with it. Like it's really hard to add anything to it now. So my son goes like, well, what motivates you? Yeah, your question is what drives you. And I said, well, I'm stuck because I had this really like infinite sized problem that took me, whatever,
Years, decades.
16 years. I kind of got to the end of it. I'm looking for the next problem, and it just doesn't, it's not that easy to find. I was going to go into product management, and my heart's not there. Now I'm looking at leadership. I think leadership is a place a lot of people are looking at. I don't have a real question. But so it drove me for those 16 years was literally the question, just what makes things better for a team? Why? What connects to what? What's there? And I did that, and that's good. What drives me now, still, I love my work. I love curiosity about how people work and leadership and why does this work and that doesn't work. I can keep that. And if you're going to ask about books, I've got a book on complexity and postmodernism, another one by a biologist on what's life, and I read all these things. But what keeps me happy in my job these days is I go to a place. I was down in Mendoza in Argentina, and Eventbrite, interestingly enough, has a programming lab down in Mendoza where the wine comes from and stuff. Mm. And I go in there, and somebody says, "Hey, this is a guy who helped write the Agile Manifesto 20 years ago, right?" So 20 years ago, these people are like, they're in their 20s. So they were like preschool or first grade when we did that stuff. And so it's in the history books. And what do we know about people in the history books? They're all dead. That's what it means to be in the history books. 16th century, Henry the First, whatever we know, right? Some guys wrote a manifesto 20 years ago. They're all dead by now, right? So I come in, and I'm obviously not dead, and I walk down to the front of the room, and I'm doing exercises with them and playing with them, and doing all this stuff. And when they go out, it's really unique, because not only did I hopefully show or teach them something, but they got to interact with somebody from the history books and take it back to their desk that day. And I said, wow, this is actually a treat. This is actually like a purpose in life, is to go around and do this with people.
And show that history is alive in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, the history book is right there in front of you, playing some weird Carpaccio games and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's interesting indeed, because I wasn't, of course, part of writing the manifesto, but I was around when that got published, and now I have a son who's turning 20 at the end of this week, studying at university, and indeed in some of his books it talks about agile, it talks about TDD, sometimes in strange ways that I think they got the history wrong, but that's always the thing, what's happening with history, I think. But it's interesting to see that basically in our own life that we can see that is already history, both good and bad, because like you say, you like you said in the beginning, you try to clean up the mess and stuff like that, but yeah, it's definitely
my oldest son, when he was, I don't know, somewhere in high school, and I can't remember the age, but adolescent, teenager thing, and he comes in one day and he says, "Dad, do people really pay you to say this stuff?" Because it's so obvious, it's so natural. And I go, "Just you wait." And so I waited till he was out of college a couple of years, and I said, "How's it going with it? It's so obvious and natural." "Dad, you have to get in here, really." It's like,
yeah, it's simple but not easy, and it's like common practices, common sense is not common practice. That's what's one of the things that we learn a lot when we see agile working in the real world. Let's put it like that. Okay, let's move on to that next question. What do you consider yourself your biggest achievement?
I think it has to be the Agile Manifesto. I mean, we literally changed the world with that. That blew up in ways. There were 17 people. We had, I don't know, 7 or 8 published loudmouths. So it was going to have an effect anyway, but it caught on like prairie fire. And we were, you can read it, you can see that we knew who our enemies were at the time. Software Engineering Institute with their statistical process control stuff, and PMI, Project Management Institute, with their Get Back to Plan, and RUP with their tools for everything. You can read it; they're just on the right-hand side. And now the PMI has declared that agile is a cornerstone of their future growth. SEI,
Which is
CMM, capability maturity model, doesn't even exist anymore. Nobody cares about it. It didn't pan out. They poured hundreds of millions of dollars into that, and they were just barking up the wrong tree. It did not move the needle, right? Collaboration. So, you know, there's no way to imagine. We used to say, well, you know, we're sitting here talking, and so this is a nice manifesto. What do you want to have happen with this? You know, I think this, you know, it should be taught in high school. It should be taught in kindergarten. It should be the de facto normal thing. You'd have to apologize and justify not using it. And someone said, you know, it should come with mother's milk. Right? And there are people now who've been in this biz long enough, and they have children that they use it for their wedding. They raise their children with this stuff. It's in there. And to get an effect like that is, yeah, you can't even imagine that for one lifetime.
You're talking about weddings. One of the nicest weddings I've been to in Ghent with friends that actually work with me. There actually was a Kanban board, and that they showed how they planned it using the Kanban board, because they're planning, and they actually moved some of the tasks, because one of it was pictures with, I don't know, with guests, and there were things that were moving there just to show it a little bit. Which was interesting. Well, the wedding was nice for much more than that, but it was interesting to just see how they actually done it, not just in theory, but talking about it. So that's nice. And I would say also, you said it a little bit in the beginning. You had big mouth people who published books, but the fact that you agreed on something was already an achievement in itself, because it could have been. I've seen so many other things where people try to collaborate that it goes nowhere, in a sense.
I've been part of 4 or 5 manifesto writing workshops, and they all blew up because of egos. And the most remarkable thing about that people don't get around to asking, how did 17 famous loudmouths, big ego people possibly manage to not just have a fight for 2 days, right? That's, you know, we had enemies in the room, and there was no fighting. It was the most amazing thing. And I spent years trying to decode what happened. And I finally concluded the magic element, and I can't say how it got there, but was what I call listening with generosity. That when somebody spoke, the other person, even though they might think they're an idiot, right, or might disagree with them professionally, assumed that person knew what they were talking about, and listened with the intention to find the valuable nugget in what was being said, right? That's not just active listening. It's really listening to work to find the brilliance in the other person's point of view. Was present there, and I can't say what made it present, but that's why this is my Heart of Agile mug, and I'll just put it up here. It says, increase the quality of listening. And that's there because of the manifesto meeting, where, you know, people really, really worked hard to understand why somebody else was making what seemed like maybe a strange sentence.
I immediately imagine a few of the people that I know who are there, who are really show this in many parts of on the world. But I assume, like you say, it's 17 people, so you all had to do a lot of that to come up with such a brilliant text.
Yeah, I mean, these days there's a couple of people that get more, let's say, airtime than other people do, and I keep reminding you, 17 people, all with different backgrounds. There are like 7 people, quote, representing extreme programming. But when you get down to the work, they're representing their own particular professional history. So we have 17 different histories in the room, all agreeing on this thing. So there was no, you said, what was the preamble, the precursor? No, you can't say that, because there were 17 of them, not 1 or 3 or 5.
Yeah, and that's and maybe that's the 17 was also for whatever reason a magic number that needed to be there. That it's
Well,
probably easier to agree with 17 than with just 2 or 3 people
I
in a
don't know.
sense.
But what this is relevant because people keep saying, why don't you update the manifesto? And we had this discussion at the end. I mean, it was a really smart group of people. We really picked up, we or the group picked up a lot of interesting, difficult topics. But one was, do we ever update this? Right? Do we maintain this? And the considered answer was, no, you can't, because if so much as one person was swapped for any other person, the whole chemistry of the room would have been different. The outcome would have been different. It would not have looked like this. So if we try to get people together again, why is it this 17 instead of some of the other people who were invited and didn't come? They'll have different views. It'll be a different thing. No, this was a snapshot in time. It was a conversation, and we produced these words. You change anything, the time, location, people, anything, and it'll all be different. So you can't maintain it.
Exactly. That would be, yeah. And many people have tried, and there's multiple versions of ideas that are there, but even a lot of people will, I'll just, even today I went back to it and I told people, like, look, if I'm stuck with a project, if I'm stuck with a team, if I'm stuck with whatever, I go back to these originally 2 pages, that the first values, the 12 principles, and I look for a solution, because there's so much wisdom in there. And I keep finding new things in it. And probably I assume even all of you will probably sometimes say, oh, did we say that? Did we even think about that? That's, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a good piece of work. Yeah, so for sure that'll be, the biggest accomplishment of my life. I can't imagine doing anything like that again.
Exactly. So let's move to that next question. What I've noticed is that many agilists, that we all have some kind of things that we do to work in a certain way that we call something a personal agility. Is there anything that you can share that you say, that's helping me in doing the way I'm doing work
Okay, so
or living my life?
that's cool. It's why I don't look at these questions before you actually ask it, because I know I've seen that question written down, but I just got a different answer just
Every
from watching you, speak in this particular moment. Um, there's a thing I've never written about, which is agile Alistair.
Hmm.
I always write about what other people find successful. So crystal clear is literally, I never used that. I just interviewed a bunch of teams. They did it. I wrote down what they did, right? Same with the other ones. But I was working on the Heart of Agile website a couple of years ago with a little company here in St. Petersburg that didn't know too much about Agile, but there were about, I guess, about eight people, 10 people on their team, something like that. And they just said that they would work however I wanted, right? And then I noticed that I do particular things that are not in the literature, and I don't tell anybody about it, and I don't teach anybody, but I do it because it's me. I can do it. I'm not giving advice to someone else to do it. I do it. And it, when you get used to it, it makes all the other agile methods look heavy, including crystal clear. I mean, including everything.
Hmm.
It's so much lighter and faster than everything else that people who get indoctrinated with it are ruined. But they go
So
to they're like,
it's
what is
even more lightweight than anything else. Now I'm really interested to learn.
well, so remember, so I'm a theoretician, right? And the main
Mhm.
thing is you're trying to get an idea from one head to another head. And always I'm looking at what's the cheapest way to get something from here to there. Okay. So I'll give you two examples from that project that were formative. Well, there were three. First is the designer. The first question was, we need new colors for the logo, right? What should the colors be? They didn't like my colors. And I said, well, I want to get a couple of my colleagues and we'll work with you. And the lady who was the designer was going like, I'm not having my clients come and sit looking over my terminal. So she was a bit grumpy and said, I'll give you 20 minutes. So Sole, who you know, Soledad Pinter, and Georgia Babic, who are visiting here, we went over there. And within 20 minutes, we went through all the colors. We picked the colors. We locked down all the decisions. She even gave us another 10 minutes to go over it. We locked down all the decisions, solved all the problems around the logo and the colors, and we're done and out. And she was like, I wasn't expecting that to go that fast. And I would go, we got to the point that I literally, as I'm on my way to the airport, she says, I have a question. I said, I got 20 minutes. I got 10 minutes. I came by. She showed me something. I said, that's no good. I'm really, you can't do that. Da-da-da-dee-da-da, back and forth, back and forth. We find another thing. And the answer is, when we get it, we never go back and revisit it. It's done. It doesn't come back out again. The alternative is what I call decision badminton, which is, she says, as she started doing, like, hits the badminton birdie, you know, over the net, and it comes down and says, what do you think of those colors? And I go, I don't like them. What about these ones? I don't like those ones, right? And that's the way decisions happen when you're not co-located, same time, same place kind of thing. And literally pointing at the screens in different ways. So she got addicted to that, so that whenever there was a problem, she'd call me up, and I was a few blocks away, so I'd go over. Never more than 20 minutes. New ideas, solved all problems. So that's pretty normal, but that's an anchor for the next part of the story. So she's going, I'm going, okay, so our stakeholders, key stakeholders, are consultants in Australia. We're doing this web page. It has to please them. That's why it's there. We've done all we can, right? And now we need feedback from them about what they think about it. She says, okay, it's the end of our, our work day. I'll write it up and prepare a presentation. No, take a screenshot and send it to me on Messenger. She goes, but what? But no, but that's not professional, right? Go, no, send it to me now. Screen snapshot, Messenger, and I sent it to Australia, and I said, we can't do anything till tomorrow. She's like looking around, like, are we done? And the next one was, we have this meeting, and Sola's on the other end of a WhatsApp, and she and I are on the screen, and we're going to do some stuff for a bit. And then she says, okay, well, I'll write this up. And I go, when do you have time to write this up? Like, she's like one of the principals of the company. She doesn't have any time. She starts looking awkward, like, well, I'll find the time or something. And her boss, whose name is Zooey, Zooey was there in the room. I said, Zooey, grab your phone, just start recording, right? So record. And I said, just tell, I forget her name, Annalise, we'll call her. I said, tell Annalise what we have waiting. So she goes, Annalise, I talked to Annalise. She goes, Annalise, we did this, shows the screen. We did this. We need some writing here. And I go, right. And Sole, you'll need to know that. And I go, 3 to 5 minutes of video. I go, send it around, and we're done. And she goes, are we done? There you go.
So people are so much used to having a slick presentation, having slick written out, and what you say. And I think this is in one of your books as well, that you say you ask people to explain things on a whiteboard. You just videotape it and you send it over. It's so much better documentation.
People can't get used to how much informality you can get away with. They think you're getting away with it. They don't realize that it enhances the communication. So this is the Alistair Agile that, in a sense, I should do a workshop on sometime, because you're just looking for, like, this doesn't matter. What's the shortest, quickest way to get it into somebody else's brain and out of my brain, whatever, right? When we got done with that project, and, we had a little ceremony, it was a tiny company with only 2 teams of 12 people. The people on the other team asked the boss, they said, does Alistair have any other projects he wants done? Because we kind of like the way that team
works. His way of working.
They had so much fun, and we're goofing around, and things are happening, but it's about communication, guess what, and feedback. So that's my agility tip, is just like, lighten it up,
Yes, we
focus on that. You're trying to get this out of your brain into somebody else's brain.
And in a sense, that's if I look back, for example, at the website from the Agile Manifesto, it was definitely not corporate. It was definitely not slick and whatever. It's just the words. There is a strange kind of picture in the background that kind of shows the people, but you don't, well, you think you recognize, but you don't really see them. And that's it. And it's the core message. It's all that needs it. And if this would have been imagined by the IBMs of this world, that would have been a very important website with lots of money put into that, and it would probably not have reached that many people as this one.
Yeah. So that's my agility tip is you can, so to give an example, this is very much Alistair's style. In 1994, I was the methodologist for a big fixed price, fixed time contract, $15 million, year and a half, IBM, all that kind of stuff. And so I was the methodology guy, and so we had use cases and CRC cards, and we had, you know, whatever else we had. Very lightweight, as you can imagine. It was all the agile stuff that we have now. Very much my style. And I had to give a presentation to the whole team, so about 40 people in the cafeteria. And it was IBM, so I was wearing a white shirt. You know, I don't think I had a tie, but I had a white shirt on. And in the 90s, we had these transparencies that you put on those who don't know the overhead projector.
Overhead
There's this
projector.
lamp and a glass and a focusing thing and a light, and it shines it on the screen, and you put the transparency on, and everybody could see what was written on the transparency, right? For young people, they don't know what this is, but yeah, it wasn't online. So the bulb blew out, and so we went for the replacement bulb, and the replacement bulb also didn't work. So they were all gathered to see this, and they said, well, we didn't have any overhead projector to show the slides. I had all these little transparencies, I had a picture of use cases, a picture of a object diagram, OMT diagram, and a picture of a, you know, whatever I had pictures of, right? And so I said, okay, so I have a white shirt on, and I literally held up the overhead transparency in front of my white shirt. I said,
people could see it in the simulation, yeah.
Well, you know, you could see it's text. Like, so this is a use case, and a use case looks like this, and we're gathering requirements with use cases, and anybody who's written one or seen one, you know what this is. And then somebody from the back says, I can't read it. Like, you don't need to read it. It's all online. All you need to know is it's called a use case, and it looks like this. It's a bunch of text. So I get an OMT diagram, and I put that in front of my shirt. So that's an OMT diagram. Is how we're documenting our design. So it says I can't read it. I go, it's all online. You can go read it. All you need to know is boxes and arrows, and it's got little things, and it's how we do our object modeling. So when I talk about like super informal, none of it. You need to know it's a use case. It's text. It's done with the requirements. You can look at it if you can. That connects to it. Right?
It's probably better, because if they would have been able to read it, their focus would have been on the text and not on what you've been saying at that time.
But the point I guess I'm after is my style is the most informal that I can get away with, but I always know what's the important point, and that one I don't deviate from, right? So there's one thing that's important, and a bunch of things that are not important, and people, I think, put too much energy around the ceremony, the form of things that aren't important, instead of like feedback. I have to get this to Australia tonight, so we can have feedback. That's important, right? That it comes over, you know, that it comes over Facebook Messenger is not important.
Yeah, it's I can definitely see that in some of the ways that we've been interacting over the years as well. I think that's definitely recognized.
Well, I think you can see my big hair picture. My big hair
indeed
picture is an indicator right there.
Yeah, that for the people who don't know it, if you go to LinkedIn, I think you still have that picture there somewhere on. So let's move to that next question, and you kind of already talked a little bit about it. What have you learned about remote working? Because especially, I know, like you said in your original book, or in a lot of your books, you talk about the value of face-to-face, but just like any of us, you've been working remotely as well, and not just in COVID, like you said, the working with the people in Australia, in St. Petersburg. So do you have any tips on how to work in a remote
Well,
profession?
you know, I've been obviously thinking about this a lot, especially over the last couple of years. I would say pre-COVID, I was dead set against distributed teams and remote work. I still am, for the record. From an efficiency standpoint, right? And then you have to bring in what are the other standpoints that are interesting. And I just had this, in fact, interview today around exactly this topic. And I told them there are conflicting forces, and I will not try to resolve the forces for you. I will tell you what the forces are. I don't see what the resolution is. I do not predict the future. I can just tell you this is the shape of what's happening, right? And my anchor point number one is I have two sons around the age of 30, plus or minus a little bit. The one is working for the state government where he is and getting a master's in information systems management. He hasn't turned on his camera in 2 years. Not for work, not for school. My other son just took a job. He was a salesperson. Now he's a customer support something. Just put into his contract that even if they build headquarters next to his house, he does not have to go to headquarters ever. So this is very relevant for me because all the theory says, don't do that. And the kids go, yeah, I'm doing that, right? So that's one of the forces. So you have to live with it, you know. And I asked my younger son, why did you put that contract in there? And he said, I've got 2 kids under the age of 3.
The exact same situation that we were talking about earlier.
And if it's 45 minutes drive each way, that's an hour and a half away from his kids driving, and he doesn't get to have lunch hour with them. When he's working from home, it's an hour and a half, that's 2.5 hours a day, 2.5 hours a day that he gets to spend with his kids that other people in the office work from home. So he said that's well worth putting in the contract. So he doesn't care. Here's the point. Neither of them care about efficiency. That's not their driver. Now we'll get to the next thing. I was a remote worker in 1993 because my wife was Mormon, pregnant with child number 3. She said, we're in Connecticut, don't know anybody. You're traveling all the time. I need to go back to Utah, family, la, 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 support system. And so I asked my boss if I could go, and she said no. And I said, I quit. She said, yes, you can go. So I went. And I did all my work and methodology work then from Utah. Now, and I called every day at 7:30, you know, and all that stuff. Now I was really happy. I was like, you hear all the remote workers saying, they're happy. I was happy. I knew what my assignment was. I was doing my assignment. I was working every day. Since I became a project sponsor, sometime in the early 2000s, and I've done this any number of times, I have never once gotten what I wanted from a distributed team. Never. 0. And that's over 20 years of trying. You know, and I know all the theory and I know all the games. Never. And so my hypothesis, and it's a weak hypothesis, but I think that the workers think they know what the assignment is, and they're working on it and they're happy. And the sponsors know that they don't know what the assignment is, and you can't get them to come find out. Right? So the only thing I can say, when I'm doing my work, I like being remote. When I'm trying to co-create with somebody, I've never yet had a successful situation. For the Heart of Agile Academy, we needed a database for students, which now has got a couple of thousand in it. I wanted a real SQL database hooked into WordPress. I got a nice programmer down in Buenos Aires. I did a model, and then we did things. Got nothing from him. I went down to Buenos Aires. Within 20 minutes in a coffee shop, we broke his model, my model, came up with a new model that was simpler and which worked, that we've used. So you see, I mean, and then I saw him twice a week for the 4 weeks I was there. And the moment I left, there's been like no progress. Okay. So for the creative decision making, the creative construction, that co-location, 20 minutes, doing this thing with the decisions and the ideas, I don't think there's any way you can replace it. And I've seen things, right, that imply that. So from an efficiency perspective, co-location is important, real, like fingers, 3-dimensional fingers on top of fingers interaction. I learned recently at the XP conference in Copenhagen, there's one more thing, which is trust. I said trust goes down as the frequency of interaction goes down. And here's a story, because I operate from stories. A friend of mine got a job with Roche, pharmaceutical in Switzerland. Roche paid for everybody to fly business class to Zurich, and they spent a week in Zurich doing nothing but team building, going shopping down Bahnhofstrasse, playing with Legos, everything. They put money on the whole topic of that you come to know the
one another and
your collaborators, right? So my net out of this for hybrid work, I think the steady state's going to be 2 or 3 times a week co-located, and 2 or 3 times a week working from home. And the purpose, the thing to do when you're co-located is either design decisions or go shopping or do something together, right? Go to the store, go to the mall, I don't know, go bowling, go cook food together, do something that builds that communication trust, those linkages. So when you're next on remote, you can go a lot faster, right? So those are the two things. So it's actually advantageous for the company to spend company money sending people
Building the trust.
to go to the mall, to go make lunch together somewhere, whatever, right? It's actually worth corporate money for just that purpose. So that's kind of where I got to at the end of that was the 2-3 day split and the two purposes of being in the same room together.
Yeah, I think there, well, like you said, the last word is not out on that. There's definitely, I think this is the next 10 to 20 years that we have to find better ways of doing that. Because like you said, it's probably not going away. We need to figure out how we can do it better. And I think for a lot of teams, they might have worked during COVID, but a lot of that was built on the trust that was built before. And so I think now, after 2-3 years, you see this already in some teams where the trust is going back, and okay, we need to see each other back again to rebuild that trust.
Remember, I always keep my data point. My one son hasn't turned on his camera in 2 years, and the other one has a problem.
Exactly.
That's a fact also, speaking of for the future, right? So I don't try to resolve the forces. These are the forces that are playing.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't want to spend too much time, but I have a 14-year-old daughter who's actually turning on her camera a lot with friends. That when she was doing homework, she has a camera on, and friends that are in different class in a different school. So she's keeping company in a sense, but they're all working on their own in a similar kind of way. So that's
I hadn't heard that before. So thank you for that data point.
Yeah, it's the different. It's again another generation, of course. They grew up with screens, they grew up with cameras, and they kind of document a lot of what they're doing on camera, video, photos, everything, and doing it a lot. But that's yet another generation, so it will take another 10 to 15 years before they're in the workforce and before we see that how that's working out. Okay, let's move to that next question. I think you're a person that likes to read, so is there a book that you read recently you want to talk about?
I don't want to talk about the book. I read everything. I don't read fiction. I've read so many fictions. I don't care who's alive and dead at the end anymore. I read a lot of psychology, philosophy, science. I got a book I tried to read called Quantum Chemistry because I wanted to know what that's about. I have this one here that I was just told about, Paul Cilliers, Complexity and Postmodernism, because I don't understand complexity theory, and allegedly he'll say something. The one I'm currently fascinated by is by Monod, Jacques Monod. It's called Chance and Necessity. And he was a biologist who got a Nobel Prize in biology. And he's building up from nothing what's the essence of life, what's the difference between matter and not matter, and so on. And that one I'm reading page by page. There's an Australian detective that I've read most of his books by now, and I read them so fast they last me like 2 nights. And the guy is Arthur Upfield. If anybody wants to chase this down, it's fascinating. Is the author, and his protagonist is an Aborigine, half Aborigine in Australia in the early mid 1900s, and he's a detective. So he has to go out into the bush. And there's always some kind of a murder mystery that involves the local Aborigines, and he uses his bushcraft and he uses
that's
blend
completely different kind of detective than we usually are used in the Western world. I would say
he spends enormous pages describing in detail the desert, the colors of the desert, how they cooked their food, how they hunted, how they drove. His first book. There was barely a car because it was written in like 1914 or something. And then the second book, an airplane showed up. And the third book, the airplane in the car. And then there's airplanes and cars after that. And so the name is Arthur Upfield, and the detective is Napoleon Bonaparte. And it's just fabulous. I sit and just devour this because I don't care. I'll even read the ending. I don't care because they always have hidden clues that they don't tell you about. So I can just watch all the people acting. when he does the big, denouement at the end, the big unwrapping at the end, then I've already seen the clues. I can see them kind of building up, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, and so you're reading it also for from an anthropological reason.
Correct.
And learning the culture and everything.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of that in there.
Yeah. So that's what I'm reading. What else you got for questions?
Well, I want to move to for me, one of the most interesting questions is, what's a question that I should have asked that you thought, oh, this is an interesting question that nobody usually asks?
I should have seen that one and had a chance to think about that. Maybe we defer that because we've done all the usual ones. Oh, I know what. I have a question that I think you should ask other people. That you didn't ask is a good one to ask, and I use it a lot. And it came out of a book that I read, and it was digested down, and it came out to this one question. There is probably something that you are good at and not known for.
Mm.
And this has to do with the dimensions of competence and recognition. Right? And so this chart of competence and recognition. But the net out of that is that most people are good at something that other people don't know about, and they don't get any recognition for it. And so I do this, especially with executives. I'll do it with anybody, but I have to do it with executives who work together a lot. They think they know each other. So I ask them, what are you good at, but people don't know about? Hey, it's like, I cook the best tuna steak ever. I'm a deep sea fisherman. I do spearfishing, whatever. I go climbing, whatever I do. And then they go, really? I didn't know that? At the end, they're like, oh, I didn't know that. So that's a great question, I would say, to ask anybody.
And so, what would be your answer to that? If I would ask you that question.
People who follow me on social media know that I dance a lot. So I'm a dancer. I'm mediocre at all dances. I can get out and do one in all dances. I don't care, right?
But when you're mediocre at all dances, then doesn't mean that you're a mediocre dancer, because you can do a lot of dances. So that's already.
I can do a lot, and my favorite is blues dancing because it's the most improvisational, free form. I like kizomba, tango, swing. I'm learning West Coast swing, waltz. All of these things. But if you get me out there, salsa, bachata, I have to change partners every dance because I have like enough moves to do one dance in salsa or bachata, and then I need a new partner because they're going to do the same ones again. Right? Tango, you have to do 3 or 4 dances at a time, so I have more tango. But yeah, people who watch me on social media see references to dancing, but dancing is my home territory in a certain way. It's a mode of expression for me, so it's something I'm good at and not so much recognized for.
Yeah, I seem to remember, I don't know when it was, 2007 or 2010 at the Agile Alliance conference, that somehow we ended up in I don't know, whatever bar or whatever it was. Then I saw you dance and was like, wow, okay, so you kind of know your moves a lot better than I do.
So, I can tell you this little story. This is one of the high points of my life, I will say. Happened this summer. I got a job doing a half a day workshop at the Swedish Tax Authority, Skatteverkstad, in Malmö. And so I was going to go do, elephant carpaccio and agile and stuff. And somebody there knew that I did tango. So this lady asks my host, hey, can I have a tango dance with Alistair? So I go, sure. And so we picked some piece, and I had a projection. I picked something with a projection and music I like. And then he goes, well, we're trying to find a place to do it. And the only place to do it is kind of in the main hallway where people gather for coffee in the morning, like just outside.
Wow.
And then he goes, and so it was going to be like 7:45 until 8. And then I was going to give a talk from 8 till 9. And then he says, is it okay if we video it? And I said, are you kidding? Of course you have to video it. If I'm dancing tango at the Skatteverkstad, right, the Swedish Tax Authority in Malmö, there has to be a recording of it. There has to be
exactly.
Right? So yeah, so I got to do that, and it worked out pretty well.
That's really nice, and because yeah, it's a kind of, yeah, this is the advantages of doing that kind, the work that you're doing all around, where you get to, well, not just meet new people and have new cultures, but dancing in strange kind of places. That's
Actually, at
a
the
very
end of
nice story.
a community, free session I did in Buenos Aires, it was on a Wednesday, and after that we were going to a very particular dance hall for tango, and so I said we're going to do a half an hour of tango lesson at the end of my talk. So I actually taught a bunch of agilists elementary tango for at the end of my talk in Argentina.
Yeah, that's kind of nice to do that on top of that. Okay, I want to move to that last question, and I know that you know a lot of people around the world. So, who do you think I should ask next?
There are two people top of my list every single time, and one is Rocío Briceño and the other Soledad Pinter.
I think this is the first one, if I'm correct.
Rocío Briceño, yeah, correct.
And this is Pintar, I think, yeah.
And that's Soledad Pinter, yeah. So
Yes.
I don't know how many Latinas you have, like not only women but also people from South America. You got Agustin Villena, who's kind of the grand old man of agile in Latin America. The Rocío is interesting, and you need to talk to her because she initiated a thing that another manifesto on agile for social impact projects. It's called Siagile, Social Impact Agile. And she corralled me, and I helped, and there were 5 of us. We wrote kind of a manifesto. So all of her focus is on applying agile in a non-product context. If you're in a village in Patagonia or Africa, or you're changing governments or government policies or roads, right? What can you do, especially in her context in Latin America? So that's really unique. And so she's agile top to bottom. You definitely have to talk to her. Bilingual, but they're both bilingual, so that won't be a problem. And Soledad Pinter has been doing this stuff since 2005. She, in 2017, was the first person to really adhere onto the heart of agile and has been helping and pushing that. So she knows, she's the one who came up with the compass metaphor and so on. So she's a deep black belt in agile she knows all the technical stuff, but from a very human perspective. As you'll find out, she's just one great big walking heart. I mean, she's just a giant.
Yeah, we've met multiple times, and indeed, it's she was already on my list, but I was kind of waiting for you to invite her because I was kind of sure that you would invite her.
Yeah, Rocío and Soledad, Sole, we call her. You really need to get them both if you can.
I'll definitely will. So, Alistair, we've been at the end of our time. If people want to reach out to you, what is the best way to get in contact with you?
LinkedIn and Twitter are both good.
So LinkedIn, that would be just with your full name, and Twitter, that's I never know how to pronounce it.
I love it. So I'll just tell you the short story of that. Twitter only allows 15 letters in a Twitter handle, and Alistair Cockburn is 16. And so I couldn't be Alistair Cockburn. And so I'm never the first Alistair anywhere. Everywhere I go, some Alistair got there first, right? And so I decided I would be the other Alistair. And so I typed in the other Alistair, and I ran that on Twitter for a while, but the R got truncated at the 15 mark. And so I was the other Alistair.
Oh.
And that just doesn't work. Nobody could find me. So there's in American slang, they have a way of combining the words the other, and they say t'other. T''O''T''H''E''R, and still in Twitter. Somewhere in my profile, it's spelled that way, T''O''T''H''E''R. So I'm t'other Alistair. I'm the other Alistair, I'm t'other Alistair. And I'm the first t'other Alistair everywhere. So I'm t'other Alistair everywhere. And hopefully nobody will beat me to be
with other new tools.
I don't want to be the other t'other Alistair. I think already one t'other Alistair is quite enough.
Exactly. So that's
how you pronounce it, and that's why it's that way. It's t'other Alistair.
T'other Alistair, and it's indeed easy to find you once you know how that works. That it's indeed to find you on all these different kind of things. So thank you very much for your time. It's been wonderful talking to you, just like always. A lot of both history, news stories, a lot of things. So very nice to have your
Thank you
time.
for
So
doing
thank you
this
very much.
series, and I love the way you're highlighting people all around the world with this.
Well, the idea for me, well, like I explained to many people, for me, it's a little bit, well, meeting again old friends, especially in COVID moments that I don't want to travel around the world. But it's also meeting new friends. It's making sure that I get connected to new friends, and it's from my own hometown. It's now after midnight, but I can sleep in my own bed. So immediately after this has been downloaded, I can just be together with my own family. A little bit like you said, it's trying to figure out how we can combine these kind of things. So it's a nice way of doing it. So thank you very much. So see you.
Bye bye.
Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.